in the implementation and delivery of CSV management practices. And major part of this problem lies with business itself, which is still frozen in outdated and narrow business thinking of value creation, which focuses on maximization of short-term shareholder value with deleterious effect on the long-term well-being of and livelihoods of society and the environment. Also strikes the narrow and outdated business thinking of paying lower wages as the best cost-cutting strategies to alleviate competitive challenges. And this also leads to trade-offs between business and society. And indeed, this is problematic, most importantly in a developing country like South Africa and Africa in general, facing multiple complex challenges. And literature has argued that there must be a fundamental shift in the mindset from a traditional business thinking to a new business thinking. And they are saying this new business thinking needs to be a sine qua non for businesses. However, there is little, as much as these scholars have said that there is a need for a change in mindset. However, there has been a little attention that has been paid on this business thinking and mindset. At best, it has only been said in passing, with words such as the new thinking, the shared value thinking, and thinking differently, without clearly elaborating what it means, what it entails, and how it looks like in theory and practice. And this study intends to close this gap. So the purpose of this study, the study is anchored on stakeholder theory, and the purpose is to gain deeper understanding on this, on the...
Apparently,
Okay. 10 minutes, it's too short, so I'm trying. Okay, no, let me try. The study is anchored on stakeholder theory, and the purpose of this study is to gain deeper understanding and conceptualization of this creating shared value thinking, and what it entails and how it looks like in theory and practice. And the study sought to resolve two research questions on what is the meaning of CSV thinking or mindset and what it entails. And how does this thinking or mindset manifest itself in theory and practice? So, literature review, as I've already alluded, that it is anchored on stakeholder theory. What we look at first, we look at this theory thinking, first value creation and stakeholder theory mindset or thinking. And at the center of this thinking, we have what we call a shareholder value theory or shareholder value mindset. And this mindset was pioneered by Chicago School of Free Market Economics, Milton Friedman, who said the business of business is business, who said the social responsibility of business is to maximize shareholder value and nothing else. And those that are intending to engage societal challenges needs to be looked as delinquent executives who are opening floodgates for socialism. So what he said is business needs to only focus on creating shareholder value. And there are those who are saying this thinking, it's wrong. It's wrong in a sense that it's only looking at the shareholders without looking at the interest of other stakeholders. And this brought one scholar, Milton Friedman, who came with a concept that is called stakeholder theory, who said business, the purpose of business is to serve the interest of each and every stakeholders in businesses. And one of the best way of serving the interest of society as one of the stakeholders, it was said that it is corporate social responsibility. So corporate social responsibility as a concept was first talked by Bowen in 1953. And it was made popular in 1979 by Carroll, when he started with a CSR pyramid, saying that the best way to serve the interest of society is through a pyramid way. However, most are saying as much as CSR is good in serving the interest of society, but it is reactionary in its nature. Because the only way we see CSR being engaged is when businesses has problems or when business has scandals. That's when they start contributing to society. So they are saying, what is it that needs to be done? And this is where creating shareholder value comes in. And it was created by my Porter and Kramer in 2011. And according to Porter and Kramer, they are saying how they created this. They are saying most businesses are frozen in a social responsibility mindset, which is wrong. And the problem about corporate social responsibility is putting interest of society at the periphery. But now they are saying it needs to be put as part of the core of business. And that's how they came up with creating shared value. And therefore, CSV has been promoted as the savior to this oversimplified thinking of business or social responsibility thinking of business. And as a potential, as a hope, which has bring potential to give rise to the next transformation of business thinking. They are saying CSV, it's one concept that will bring a transformation in business thinking. And they are defining CSV as policies and operating practices that enhances competitiveness of a company while simultaneously advancing economic and social conditions in the communities where it operates. However, Porter also laments lack of overall framework as a guiding principle for CSV. So also there are scholars who are saying CSV, noble and good as a concept, but it also has its own limitation, because some are saying it's a concept that rehashes already known concept, and it's a buzzword. It's not a theoretical concept, but a buzzword. Some are saying, in fact, CSV, it's a case of intellectual piracy, as it provides no acknowledgement of extant literature, because they are saying it has already been known. And CSV has also been called a neoliberal logic that does not work in the context of the poor, as it leaves the poor poorer than before, while only proving beneficial to the affluent. Porter and Kramer also suggest that there is a need for overall framework that will assist in enhancing creating shareholder value. And Pfizer in 2013, they came up with a concept called innovating for shared value, where they are putting 5 mutually reinforcing elements of shared value. They are saying shared value needs to start by embedding societal purpose. It needs to first gain insight into targeted societal challenges, and it also needs to be measurable. Pfizer says it takes these 5 mutually reinforcing elements to successfully deliver and implement CSV. However, Pfizer has also considered that it needs to begin with different thinking. But in this framework here, he has omitted that different thinking. As I've said, that many scholars have always rhapsodized about different thinking, but they have not told us what do they mean by different thinking. Now, this study wants to close that gap of giving a meaning into this different thinking. So the methodology that the study followed was a social constructivism of understanding how individuals and groups in a social setting construct their perception of social reality, which suggests perception of reality as constructed rather than discovered. The aim and objectives of the current study is to explore and gain deeper understanding of South African banking sector's CSV practices that create or socially construct this new CSV mindset. The study deployed qualitative multiple case study analysis of 4 major banks and the Banking Association of South Africa to understand this CSV thinking. And the research relied on multi-method approach, including preliminary interviews, semi-structured in-depth interviews, document analysis, and field notes to collect qualitative data. And the multiple method assists us as a corroboration and triangulation of results to ensure that there is trustworthiness in this study. So findings are, we find that indeed, when we go to the field, we start conducting interviews, we look at different documents. There is indeed this different thinking that is needed. Why? Because even raw data tells us that there is a need to move away from traditional thinking. Because some of raw data or interviews, some of them are saying there is absolutely big billion-dollar opportunity if you can change your mindset. But there is much that we can do. We need a little bit of a shift in our mindset. So, again, one interviewee says he brings the product that they have within the bank, which is called e-wallet or instant money, where you can withdraw money without having a bank account, which is more focused on inclusive banking. Then he says, let's take our e-wallet product, for example. So e-wallet was born out of a very esoteric thinking in terms of how we are brought in the scope of banking and how do we touch more people's lives. So we wanted to also understand, if we are saying there is this esoteric thinking that is needed within the banking, what do they mean by esoteric thinking? Then they are saying it probably means that we need to have leaders who have deeper care for humanity and unrelenting commitment to making meaningful change in people's lives, or having an unwavering commitment and conscience to society. And one of the interviewees says, so as I said, I think it comes back to human factor, deeply understanding what people need. So when I do my work, it first starts with surrounding myself with people who are passionate about bringing change and who are truly interested. So the second esoteric mindset is, they are saying, as much as we need to focus on issues that affect society, what we also need, we need to understand that banking as a business, it has investors. It also has to make money. So they are saying the thinking that we also need is to be ambidextrous, to balance the interests of society while we also balance the interest of shareholders and the interest of business. To balance the interest of every stakeholders while we also balance the interest of shareholders. So they are saying this mindset is called ambidextrous mindset. And the interviewee, as a quote, he says, as much as it is important to solve problems of society, but as a banker, you have to also think of how you are going to make money for the bank in the long run. Or you might as well go and sit at our foundation. So another requisite mindset is the long-term view or long-term mindset, where participants agree that CSV management require patience and long-term view rather than short-term or myopic traditional corporate thinking. And one of the interviews says, if you look at the bottom of the pyramid or grassroots market, where people are struggling to make ends meet because of lack of resources. So to get this market right, you need to have a long-term mindset and respect and patience for this market, and they will reward you dearly. So the other mindset is, they believe that you need to have a risk-taking mindset, because you are engaging a low-income market where there is literally no money. So how do you make calculative risk-taking? How do you have that? How do you ensure that you have that risk-taking mindset? And they are saying there is a need for a risk-takers or risk-taking mindset required to be successful in implementing the CSV mindset and the opportunities. But in order to leverage those opportunities, you have to start to run the business in a different way and take slightly different risk appetite. So how does this esoteric requisite mindset manifest itself in practice? To make an example of one bank, it has a product called e-wallet, but all the banks do have this instant money product, but this bank is one bank that pioneered the product. And they are saying, as they've said, that when they start creating this product, they had to take an esoteric mindset. So the bank suggests that it began with having a deeper and intimate understanding of the needs and challenges facing the poor who do not have bank accounts as a result of lack, unsecure and regular income, and how the poor interacts with those challenges that they are facing. So this shows that the bank started with having that societally conscious mindset by having a deeper understanding of the needs and challenges that society faces. And they are saying, then from there, by first having a deeper understanding of the challenges that society understands, it's now how do you take technology, how do you take products and connect them with the product, and how do you ensure?
So
Okay.
yeah, if you can just summarize, you were not looking that side, so I wanted to give you some time here.
So they are saying this cannot be engaged through philanthropy, or this cannot be engaged through CSR, but it needs to be engaged through products and services. And this shows that mindset where business says, we are going to solve these challenges, but we are going to solve them in a way that makes profit for the bank. So it shows that ambidextrous mindset of balancing the interest of society while also balancing the interest of business. So the bank also says, the bank charges depositors a small fee with an understanding that the withdrawer is the one who is desperately in need. So what they are doing is they are not charging those who are withdrawing. They are charging those who are depositing money. Because with the understanding that those who are withdrawing money are those who are desperate for money, and they cannot charge them. It's better to charge those who are depositing money. And they are saying they are doing this as a way of not burdening the beneficiaries. So the bank agrees that the idea was, in fact, the idea came as a collaboration between the CSR fund. They are saying that the CSR fund came on board as a way, as a patient income, because they are saying, while they also doing this, they also need to guard the interest of shareholders. So they are saying they also reached out to CSR fund as a patient fund for them, as a patient capital for them to start this product. And they also collaborated with different entrepreneurs from the township, which shows that they are taking calculated risk. They are not only spending or investing investors fund regularly. So this is how it manifests itself in reality. So we are trying to also look at how do this esoteric requisite mindset contribute to theory or in practice. So we are saying, Pfizer et al. Says it takes 5 mutually reinforcing elements to successfully deliver and implement CSV. However, he has also considered that his framework still lacks of one thing, that different thinking. So the study is making contribution by showing that there is this requisite mindset that is required on the theoretical framework forwarded by Pfizer et al. So it starts with esoteric requisite mindset, then it comes with the 5 themes that was brought by Pfizer et al. So again, for practical contribution, this 5 mutually reinforcing framework that was introduced by Pfizer, he introduced these principles as a principle for innovating for shared value, as 5 mutually elements of framework that could be used as a guiding principle by practitioners. So by also contributing with this requisite mindset, it also helps when it comes to practice. Limitation of the studies, this was a case study research focusing on the banking sector. So therefore, the results cannot claim generalizability of the entire business sector in South Africa. Furthermore, the study only focused on the supply side, only focused on managers, only focused on the banking sector, without looking at the demand side, without looking at the impact that different mindset makes in society. So for future research, if research could be done to look at the relationship of this CSV mindset and its impact on societal challenges. And another future research is to broaden unit of analysis, not only looking at one sector, but looking at different sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the best is to check all presentations because you took about 20-something minutes. So can I suggest that we take all the presentations? Meanwhile, colleagues just jot down the questions, because even for practical purposes, it means you'll be going up and down to answer questions. Whereas if you take all the presentations, then you can just come up once and answer your questions. So let's invite Olivia, who will be looking at the intersection between philanthropy and public policy, the case of Zimbabwe. So you have about 20 minutes as well.
Okay.
Up to 20 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. I think I will use less time than that. Where am I supposed to be pointing this? Up there?
At the window.
That window? No, they haven't put my presentation. Okay. can see it. All right, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much. My presentation is on the role of philanthropy in influencing policy, public policy, and my case study is on Zimbabwe. The main purpose, let me see if, okay, that's good. That's fine, okay. So the main purpose of my paper is focusing on identifying the role of philanthropy in influencing public policy, and I am going to zero in mostly in Zimbabwe. And what I have noted is that philanthropy is growing globally at an increasing speed, and there are so many philanthropy that are coming up, or philanthropic organizations that are coming up. And by that, you'd find that then there is the emergence of genuine philanthropy and bad philanthropy, but I'll talk much about it when I come to the findings. But what I also realized is that on philanthropic organizations in Zimbabwe, most of the philanthropic organizations, they are registered as trustees or as private voluntary organizations that are PVO. Those are the two registrations that are prevalent in Zimbabwe for philanthropy organizations. But the challenge that is there is most of the organizations, they don't register as private voluntary organizations or a PVO. Why? It's because there have been so many processes that are involved in order for an organization to be registered. So most of the organizations have opted to register as trustee organizations. But there is also a pending bill on private voluntary organization bill that has passed the legislation. It is the House of Assemblies. And when I go down to the Zimbabwe philanthropic environment, I also picked a study that was done by, let me see, yeah, a study that was done by Indiana University. Indiana University, it is an organization or a university that is looking at global philanthropy environmental index. And when they were looking at that global philanthropic index, they placed Zimbabwe as a country that is improving a bit in its scores. They were comparing 2018 and 2022 global philanthropy environment. But when you're looking at easing of the operating environment, in 2018 it was ranked at number 2 out of 5. Now it says 3.67 out of 5. And then on tax incentives, it has actually gone down because of the taxes, the heavy taxes that we have in Zimbabwe, where people are heavily taxed. And there is also an issue with cross-border philanthropic flows, where it is very difficult for philanthropy into the country. So that is also going down, and even the political environment, it is also going down. In Zimbabwe, it is deteriorating, and the economic environment. The economic environment, it is also caused by the economic meltdown that is there, the high inflation, and all the issues that are going on. And then the social-cultural environment is the one which has been at 3, and they have maintained that index. So on background, more to look at is what is it that, and these have been given mostly by some foundations that have been giving some technical expertise to that. But when I was looking at most of the research papers that I looked at, they were indicating that the most US foundations, they put a small amount of their funding on policy advocacy and democracy. Most of their funding, it goes to social services, it goes to health, education, but it's just a small percentage that is there for public policy. And then on the objectives and the research questions, my objectives, there were 3, and also the research questions are 3. One, I was examining the role of philanthropy in influencing public policy, assessing the government and policymakers' responses to philanthropy, and proffer recommendations on how philanthropy and government can influence public policy with the view of advancing the human rights and also the well-being of the vulnerable people. And it was also telling with the questions that I was asking about what is the role of philanthropy, how is the government and the policymakers responding to the views of the philanthropy, and also what are the recommendations that we can proffer to both philanthropy and the government. And the methodology that I used was qualitative methodology, and it was the desk review. I also did the purposive sampling of key informants interviews that I did with the heads of philanthropy organizations, some of the government policymakers, and also some individuals that I also interviewed, and even the beneficiaries, in order for me to get their views on that. And then I used content analysis on my data analysis. So the main findings of this, I'm sorry, I think they are not coming up as big as I would want there, but anyway, the main findings that came up was mostly the first one. It was that philanthropy support in Africa is actually increasing, and I also found out most of the networks that are listed there on our banner, they are actually the ones which are growing, and they are supporting philanthropy in Africa. And then I had a session on transparency, use of funds, climate change and conservation, economic growth, social services, that is health and education, and also on open society. So I'm just going to give a brief of the findings. So on the philanthropy support, I think I have talked about it, so I'm not going to repeat that. But what I have also realized when I was doing the key informant interviews is that there is growth of community philanthropy in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe is among the top 10 countries that is also receiving philanthropy funding across the world. And on that, we have seen that from Zimbabwe is among the top 10 countries that are receiving funding. This is based on a study that was done by CVO in 2019. Zimbabwe was on number 9, and it was receiving 23% of the funding. And then its influence on social sectors. So what I have also picked from the reviewing the papers and talking to the key informants, I've realized that the philanthropy is actually filling the gap that the government is missing, and also sometimes complementing the government efforts. Although most of the philanthropy is on service delivery in the education sector, in the health sector, but I was focusing more on how is philanthropy influencing public policy in these sectors. So I have picked that the philanthropy has influenced the change or the amendment of the Public Health Act in 2018 that involved the provisions that are now recognizing the village health workers, of which village health workers, they are the community cadres that would go educate people about health hygiene, they would do growth monitoring, and now they are part and parcel of the health cadre in the Public Health Act, and it was influenced by the philanthropy. And also there is the incorporation of the health center committees. So in each health clinic or at a local clinic, there is now a committee of a health community, health committee centers that are actually manning the center. They are developing the operations of a clinic together with the health center, with the health officers or with the nurses. They are also manning even the results-based financing. This results-based financing is money that is given as incentives for nurses to attend to poor or rural people who are going to the health centers, and they are paid an income, and from that income they share the 25% as an incentive for them to be attending to poor people who are coming to their health centers, and 75% is used for improvement of the health centers. And the other issue which I have also noticed is that the philanthropy has helped to domesticate some of the international health guidelines, like the COVID-19 implementation. WHO, other international organizations, and the local philanthropy were actually on the forefront, telling people on how you can stick to COVID-19 guidelines, and also they are helping on HIV and AIDS, on adherence. They are bringing in new guidelines around that. In education, they have also brought in the low-cost boarding schools. In Zimbabwe, you would find that the schools, they are far apart in the rural areas. So a girl would walk maybe 10 to 20 kilometers going to school. So what happened with the philanthropy is they started with giving bicycles to girls in order for them to ride going to school, but they found out that 20 kilometers is still far, and then they initiated the low-cost boarding school, and this has been adopted now by the government. Of course, there are some issues of safeguarding that are still being talked about or considered, but at least they have influenced the low-cost boarding school, and they have also influenced the amendment of the Education Act, which has removed the corporal punishment. It has also increased the age of consent for sex. It is also increasing the rape penalties and the free education model that has been, it has been showcased in some of the regions, but now it is part of the Education Act. So at least it is influencing some policies in that way. And then on open societies and democracy, you would find, as I had indicated earlier, of the shrinking environment in Zimbabwe, but philanthropy and politics, they also share the same aspiration of creating public value. So you'd find for politics, they want to create public value, the politicians, and it's the same with philanthropy. So when they are stepping almost like on each other's toes, it becomes a big challenge. That's why there is more of a shrinking operating space for philanthropy. But however, there are also some positives that I picked on how philanthropy is influencing public policy in open societies. For example, in 2013, the Zimbabwean constitution that had more pro-democracy agenda was pushed by philanthropy. They assisted with public hearings. They assisted in empowering people with the correct knowledge, and the constitution was adopted. But there are still some challenges where the same constitution has been amended, and now they are most of the authoritarian sections, they are back, and the centralization of the power on the executive is back, but at least there was a good road that 2013, the philanthropy managed to push that public policy. And there's been also some technical assistance that has been given during the electoral system. Right now, we are a few days away from elections, and you'd find philanthropy, they are working on civic education, telling people about the correct, more of disinformation, and they are coming up with so many provisions that they are looking at, and even pushing Zimbabwe Electoral Commission by giving them TA. We have several public policies that have been amended, like the Public Enterprise, the Cyber Security, the Marriage Act, Private Property Act. All those, they were pushed by the philanthropy, and in a bid for a person to be liberated and also to create public value. Of course, there's still issues with lack of trust and sharing of information between the government and philanthropy, where most of the information is not disclosed to the philanthropy. So it makes them, it's difficult for them to give informed decisions because they are not given the correct information by the government. And then I'll move on to economic growth. On economic growth, how philanthropy has pushed or influenced public policy. is, I think all of us, we know about the looming recession which have been talked about since COVID-19 era, and we are anticipating that many nations might also reduce their money, they might reduce the aid that they are channeling to Africa, but at the same time we are also pushing for African philanthropy to be coming up, but there is this looming recession that is coming up. But despite that, so far the Zimbabwean philanthropy have managed to take center stage in the debate of the land rights and the private property rights that makes many philanthropy to be at edge. We know with the economic challenges that we have, but at least they are pushing in, but they are not yet getting much traction because land is politicized in Zimbabwe. So it is a political decision for a philanthropy to get into it, and most of the board members, they develop cold feet on that, but they are actually managing to push some. There are some leeways around there. And then there is also the issue that most of the people who benefit from land or mines, they are aligned to the elites. So it becomes also difficult for philanthropy to be pushing or to be influencing most of the economic growth policies, but at least there have been some improvement in the export market on special zones and also some innovations that we can talk about. And then the second from last on the findings is transparency of in the use of funds. And on this one, I have gathered that most genuine philanthropy advocate for transparent use of money for both government and also for philanthropy. So philanthropy themselves, they are also putting in some guidelines on how they can guide each other to be accountable to the public and also to the government. They are also putting some policies that are fighting terrorism, cross-border crime, improving cooperation and information sharing. Okay, and there is also the deaf promise that has been introduced in government. It was the push of the philanthropy that we need to know the resources that are coming into the country, how they are used, and now we have it. And there have been public financial management amendment acts that have been also been influenced by the philanthropy. Then the last one is on climate change and conservation. We know everyone is talking about climate change, and even the philanthropy in Zimbabwe, they are also talking about it. Though we have some challenges on when we are pushing for climate change that have been adopted, they are benefiting mostly the elites. So you'd find the solar farms and all that there, the contracts, the tenders are given to the elites, and then the corruption would also be at the center stage. But at least there are several litigation cases that have been in the courts because of the displacement that are happening with these climate change issues, or even on small scale miners, where the large corporations like from China, they are coming in into the country without going through the social environmental impact assessment. They are just coming in, start extracting and all that, and people are moved from one place to the other without being compensated. So those are some of the issues that are there. And lastly, on the recommendations, I have just like 6 recommendations to philanthropy and the public policy, that philanthropy and government should coexist in order for them to influence the public good and also to influence progressive policies. They should also have the enabling in where there will be legal permits for people who are coming into the country. We have so many reports where some technical expertise are turned away from the airport. They are not allowed to get into the country. So we need that environment to be to be improved on, and also removal of the tax barriers for cross-border philanthropy. We have reports of drugs being expiring at borders without being allowed to get into the country, and collaboration also between, collaboration mostly on greater opportunities to learn from each other, from philanthropy and government, to improve public policy. And then the other one is also that philanthropy should also come together and talk with one voice, because we have seen a challenge where philanthropy are coming with different messages to government, messaging different things that would hinder good public policy influencing, and there should also be a demand and a supply sides well equipped in order for them to respond, because if you are equipping the citizens, you also need to ensure that the duty bearers are equipped for them to respond to the demands that are coming in. So that is my recommendation. And the last one is we need to go beyond the blueprints and the white papers. Let's go beyond just having public policies adopted and put in the shelves, not implemented. Can we go further to implementation, resourcing, evaluating, and refining the public policy? Thank you very much.
Is there a reward for someone who takes shorter time? I'll be done in 10 minutes. Okay. So my name is Munya Mafumo from the African Leadership Center. So my study is on self-help projects funded by corporates, and this is a case study from Zululand, and it was funded by Mondi. So a brief introduction and background. So Africa is faced with the fastest growing population in the world, and it is estimated that by 2030, Africa's youth will contribute about 42% of the global youth population. And one of the greatest challenges that African nations have to deal with is the issue of youth unemployment. And Stats SA 2019 says that the youth age between 15 and 24 are the most vulnerable in South Africa labor market, as the unemployment rate among this group was 55% back then. I'm sure it is getting to close to 70% right now. And the other challenges that come with a growing youth population, such as a growing demand on social services, as housing, education, and good infrastructure. So the challenges of a high youth dividend is always high unemployment rate among the youth, the higher risk of drug and substance abuse, HIV infections, HIV prevalence. So all these challenges need that we come up with new solutions for local communities. So a case for self-help. So self-help as a concept was developed in India in the 1960s, and it's basically a neoliberal approach to poverty alleviation. Neoliberals believe that the poor have it in them to lift themselves out of poverty. So it's, beyond the structural reasons why people are poor, basically. It grew because it offered sustainability compared to donor funding models to poverty alleviation. And the program has had great success in India and Bangladesh, and is now being replicated in a number of African countries. Okay, I'm not sure this thing is working. I'm just going to go ahead without it. Yeah. It's so far. Oh my God. Okay. Okay. So, my study area was in Zululand, where I was studying the self-help groups that have been implemented there by, in the northern parts of KwaZulu-Natal, also known as Zululand. So Mondi is a paper company, one of the biggest companies in KZN, which leases land from Ingonyama Trust to grow their trees there. So around the Mondi area, there is high poverty, there's high unemployment, poor service delivery, and this has led to high volatility and protests, which has placed the sustainability of the farms under stress. So for Mondi, because it's a paper manufacturing company, a tree takes 17 years from the time of inception to the time of harvest. So one of the challenges that they were facing is when people are protesting, they'll ban the trees. So if you ban a tree at 10 years, which means the company has lost investment of 10 years. So with the government not coming to the party in terms of alleviating the social problems in that area, Mondi was then trying to come up with a system to help deal with the social problems. So this is where they then come up with, tried to replicate the implementation of the self-help groups in South Africa. So how does this work? Mondi comes up with the community leaders. They come to a community and then they have what is termed a community meeting, and then they sell the idea of community self-help group. And then after that has been done, the community then divides itself, or people that are interested, to form these groups between 7 to 10 people, and then the 7 to 10 people then form a group, and the group has to save a minimum of 10 rand each member. So they meet once a week, each member brings 10 rand, and that's their contribution to the group. So in a month, that would be like 40 rand minimum, which translates to about $2 a month, right? What then Mondi then does with that initial investments, maybe a couple of 3 or 4 months or 6 months down there, Mondi comes to the group and says, how much do you have? And whatever the amount that the group has, they then multiply it by 3 as a social investment from Mondi. So if the group has managed to save 1,000 rand, Mondi will give them an extra 3,000 rand, and then they will have 4,000 rand. So that's the whole funding concept of self-help group. So when these funds they've now collected them, so how are these funds going to be used, right? First of all, the fastest way to grow money, maybe in South Africa, is using a concept of over-mashonisa, right? Credit is very difficult to get without capital, without housing and everything. So they forms the first initial amount where people can come and borrow from. So the group members can borrow from those funds, right? And then when they borrow, it's expected that they start businesses, or they can borrow to maximize profits in the group. So when you borrow 100 rand, they can agree at a 20% interest rate, which is higher than banks, but so that we raise funds quickly. So when you borrow 100 rands, you pay it back as 120 back into the group, and also continuing to pay your weekly savings so that the money grows. And then Mondi will continuously multiply whatever you are bringing into the group, right? And then eventually, when you have enough capital as a group, it is expected that you start an enterprise as a group, right? So the enterprise, every member of that group will then work in that enterprise, and then does not, they don't pay salaries. The members work there, and they don't, so that they maximize the amount of money to grow the money in the business, right? And so when you start maybe a catering company, because Mondi is occupying huge tracts of land in the province, they have the capacity to give small contracts to these businesses, right? So if Mondi is hosting functions or whatever is happening, they then go back to these small companies that has been formed from these SHGs and say, here's a contract to provide this, and here's a contract to provide the other thing, right? And then eventually, as the groups grow, they form what is called a cluster, right? So a cluster is a combination of like 10 healthy groups that have started, they've been serving for a while, for a year or two. Then they come together and form one cluster. And then that gives them a bigger pool of funding for whatever enterprises that they are trying to achieve. Okay, no, we're not done. Oh. So the evaluation of the program, basically, it has received a sustainable success and growth over the last 4 years since they started doing this. So at present, there are over 50 SHGs that have been formed, with over 80% of them being youth. And youth, I'm using the states as a definition of a youth, which is someone who's below 35 years. And then 2 clusters have been formed since the inception of the program. And so the success also can be, they are highlighting that the program is so successful, like when we had looting in KZN and the whole economy came to a standstill, the SHGs, they were able to provide support to communities, support to the people in their communities, the most vulnerable, you know, and helping contain protests and everything and protect the trees. So, so what are the challenges of the effort? So yeah, in hindsight, the program has reduced the number of protests, but that means that the structural challenges that drive poverty will remain unchallenged, you know. One thing about the South African political landscape, you know that it's referred to as a protest nation because it's got a very active citizenry, which stands up to injustices and forces both the government and the private sector to act in certain situations. So with this, what I would call the piecemeal kind of giving in philanthropy, which does not change the structural problems, what we see is the appeasing of the community, and then in the long run, it might do more damage than good. Then the earnings from the groups have not moved the earning income significantly of members, because the funder will multiply what has been served, and scaling up is very difficult. So as I highlighted, like if a group is saving 10 Rand, even if the donor is multiplying that by 3, it's difficult to scale, and it takes a very long time to scale. Then people become discouraged, and even on the projects that people then engage in, because it's a group effort, it's not as effective as when one person gets the contract, because the profit still needs to be shared among 10 people, which then reduces the amount of money that the people get. And then the role of the state in poverty alleviation is brought into question. And in this case, the traditional structures like the Ingonyama Trust, which is leasing land, is making a profit from the lease of the land, but those proceeds are not reaching every member of society. And because this self-help funding method is also when it's initiated, as I said earlier on, the community leaders, which is the Ingonyama Trust and the traditional leaders, are involved in this whole thing. So they then do not see a need to then transmit any of the profits from the rentals that they get.
Practitioners. I am interested in writing, and I'm learning so much from the feedback that is coming in and out. The earlier session had so much feedback, and I was taking notes, and I think that's why I'm here. So my background is in working with nonprofits to support in many ways, which I'll come to as I speak. So I am interested in this conversation around localization. So I'll take you through a background of this issue, a summary of what I think I would want to study and write on, and why I think it is important. So, I'm using the wrong slides. So localization is both an English term, making it local, but also, speak through the mic, but also an English word that means to make things local, but also a concept that is coming up quite a bit right now. It's not an emerging issue in itself, but the models of it are starting to be taken, I think, a bit more seriously. We've talked about localization for decades. USAID has had policy after policy around issues of localization. We've had a lot of European countries really talking about co-funding and issues that just promote local actors being at the forefront of development. However, in the recent past, it has been felt that we are saying a lot of academic things, but how do you make it practical? And that's what I'm hoping to study about. So localization seeks to shift development to the hands of the local actor. The local actor can be the national space, can be local communities where the work is being done, can be local non-profits. It's whoever local means in a different context. It could be Africa, if you're talking about a larger aspect, but it is driving the implementation policy to the hands of the local actors. And that's what that concept is about. It's in the backdrop of a lot of development work, and I'll speak as an African. A lot of the work, development work being done here is primarily funded by actors outside Africa. A lot of donors in the north, and so this conversation is in the backdrop of that. So localization looks at local communities, local organization, local perspectives, local priorities, local resources, local approaches, just to mean that if you drive your own development, you're likely to prioritize the things that are a priority to you. You're likely to own the processes differently. It is your money, it is your effort, so you own it differently. It's local knowledge. It's something you understand, something you're familiar with. And so why the concept is deemed to be important and why the study is important is because development then is likely to be a bit more effective if we work with local actors and local knowledge. It doesn't suggest that we break all ties from the rest of the world. That's not the suggestion. The suggestion is that we drive our own things. We take a forefront. We hold more power in terms of making decisions around what is important to us. Not moving away from everyone else, but saying how can we work together with balanced power. So there are a few gaps around this whole concept. One of it is the drivers of localization at the moment are the people who are giving us money. A lot of policies around localization have come from conversations with donors. Somewhere in Europe, the last conversation, for example, where the grant bargain commitment was made was in Istanbul. And 68 donors made commitment, but they were all donors. So the design of that agenda is by the people who are giving towards the work, but are not necessarily local actors. And of course, then, there might be some challenges with that. The other issue is around capacity. Why they are driving localization is a lot of donors are saying, we don't give funds directly to local actors because we don't think they have capacity. But the conversation continues to be, what is capacity? A lot of, if it's from a literacy point of view, now we have young people, someone talked about youth, young people who are more educated than ever. You have young people who have this capacity that we're talking about. But the other side of it is capacity only what is local knowledge capacity? Yes, it is. There are a lot of things we know that we can use in our work and in driving this development conversation. So the word capacity has been used to put down these local actors, yet without a fair assessment of what local capacity is. The other gap that has been seen is around flexibility in funding. funding is being given to programs without looking at what are the mechanisms put to make sure that organizations are firm, they're strong, they're well put together, that the systems are put together, that when you train this capacity, they don't leave and go to work in other continents because they are trained and then poached. Again, someone else said that earlier. But you're able to maintain them because you have what it takes to run the organization. It's in defining standards from a European or a Northern point of view, looking at organizations, local actors not having the capacity because they don't meet the standards. But the standards that are being put in front of us are one-sided. Can we find ways to balance the standards? Decision making, a lot of institutions, a lot of non-profits we have history in being in the global north. You find a lot of the human resource we have a lot of people working to implement, but at the decision level, you find the decision level is still at the hands of the donors. But that is not a fault of their own. If you give money, you want to know where your investment is going. Of course, you still have the power, you still have the interest, you still want to remain at the top of that food chain. So what can we do then to bring back the conversations and take back the power on localization? So what I propose and what I've been looking at is around localization. One of the things that is a challenge is the issue of institutional strengthening for local actors. Institutions that are strong enough to build trust, to be accountable, to be transparent, to be effective in how they do what they do, and to have impact that lasts. But that takes time. It takes a lot of work, and I'll just say that in a bit. So the objective is look at what is the correlation between effective localization and institutional strengthening. At the end of all this, I hope to be part of a team, hoping some of you will be part of that team, to look at the localization models that are there, question them and see is there an opportunity to enhance those. So by the end of all this, we need to be able to action this local agenda. Why I think this is important is because for us to have the kind of impact we want to have. So I'll start with the end, where I see us being, where we all are working towards being, is I think we are still working towards issues of dignity. Do we have food? Do we have the very basics? But it's time that we start working towards having work that talks about Africans being prosperous, going beyond the basics. So for us to get to a level where we are talking about development from that point of view, we need to have institutions that are strong. They are the foundation of all the work you do. If the institutions we are working through are not strong, the reality is our work will not be as impactful as we want it to be. It will be difficult to be accountable, to be trustworthy, because we don't have processes, we don't have systems, or we are not working to learn and enhance those. We will continue struggling with issues of resource because, again, of issues of trust without having proper strategies for building resources. And so we remain challenging our opportunity to drive development. So I think issues of capacity strengthening is something we continue to take seriously. Issues of programming and having resource strategies that drive sustainability. We need to have programs that build the capacity of the locals themselves. Someone was talking about philanthropy earlier and the opportunities we have in terms of having African philanthropy. But what I'm suggesting is beyond the high net worth philanthropy conversations, can we have more people with more money in their pockets so that they're able to also drive their own work? And finally, we need to really drive policy change at institutional level, but also at the level of economies with our governments and so forth. And finally, hopefully I've kept time. Finally, I have the hope that I'll continue with the study, looking at the models that are there around development and the role of non-profits specifically, local actors being at the forefront of that. I hope to look at why we need to drive localization, the challenges around localization, and just looking at the role of institutional strengthening specifically in terms of enhancing that conversation, and then working towards enhancing the models that are there, having them being driven by us designing those models. So that's the study that I hope to conduct, and yeah, I think I'm done for now.
I was hoping not to be the first one, but anyways. Yeah, I think, well, I hope they're all papers in progress. So there's some value in it. I'll start off with just who's going to challenge you much further. Because even the origins of SHGs, giving them an Indian origin, and ignoring the African origin of local self-help groups, etc. Maybe it's the terminology. Because that agency that you're making reference to that is taking place in Zululand is quite common across Africa. It's got many African names. So maybe it's the term that you are using that makes it look like then it has Indian origins. But that's actually the core form of social organization in many of our communities across Africa. So I think there's that importance to not only make us look like we're imitators of a culture, but actually that we shape our cultures. And it's very important. Given that is a study that is happening in South Africa, I think it's also important for you to frame it maybe around Ubuntu, etc., and understanding. But you're limiting also its agency. You know, you're looking at it as if it's a neoliberal thing, etc. But I think it's unpacking what neoliberal, because I think it actually works at the intersection or outside the limits of neoliberalism. So I think it's very important for us to do that. Then Sele, yeah, I think now this is my third or fourth time hearing. We had earlier around, from colleagues at Giving Tuesdays, around individual behaviors, mindsets, what shifts, what causes giving, etc. So I'm not so sure what happens in a conference like this, the moment at which we exchange papers, exchange ideas, because when I heard you speak, and from what we learned from the Giving Tuesday presentation, I just felt like there was a need for us to do that, so that we understand all those relationships around, number one, individual giving, and also how corporates do give, etc., those challenges. But again, challenging, like what he's doing, Mnyarazi, challenging this thing about, because yours is about shared value. And I think you are at pains to explain its origins. Yeah, you could, but you need to really take us to say what impact is it having on the ground? Because I think there's a lot of emphasis on the contestations around its origin. It's okay. I think for PhD purposes, it's okay. But for the kind of conference discussions we're having now, is to begin to unpack it to say, to what extent is it different from what we've seen others do, etc.? Is this something unique to a certain number of corporates, etc.? Because that way, then, it begins to have value beyond your academic study, but it begins to influence practices. That's very important. And, you know, I was sent here by a philanthropist to say if there's a great paper that has got potential, we would like to fund it. I think the last paper deserves consideration, you know, this localization thing around the theory of change, etc. So if there's a paper, please let us know. There are people who could fund the research.
I think Catherine and then Beatrice. It's fine.
Yeah, and of course, happy to catch up with you over what we presented at Giving Tuesday as you finalize your paper. So my name is Catherine Wendwa, and I just wanted to follow up with a few questions for Sele. If you've noticed any dynamics around personalities of CSO, personalities of companies, no, civil society, no. personalities of CEOs and how that shapes CSR. And then for Olivia, one of the things that I also wanted to ask is, Kenya is also experiencing the same context, shrinking space around the legal environment, Tanzania, Uganda. Are there opportunities for, is data showing us a trend? And are there opportunities for us to have a collective approach to advocacy? Just quickly, the other one is Munyarazi, and it's around the outcomes from self-help groups. And I was wondering whether there are some unexpected outcomes from that approach of funding them. And then a quick one to Mercy. I think there are a lot of discussions around combining the element of localization to institutionalizing local actors. And my question is around what happens to very efficient informal networks and how will that affect them? Thanks.
Thanks once again, great insights. I think I've got to two. One, I think there's responsibility. Then I wanted to find out if you then looked at even fair value distribution as a concept itself, and how the corporate social responsibility and the discussions around philanthropy also drives how eventually the extent to which corporate social investments in terms of even amount or the target are eventually realized, considering that you already indicated that especially when you're looking at, say, a community, on one hand you have communities that are engaged in a business as also contributing, and they're looking for fair value distribution from the perspective that they are either bringing a product or a service, that eventually when the companies make profits, it has to be fairly distributed to them who are actively engaged in that particular value chain, and vis-a-vis the corporate social responsibility that now comes into a community as a whole. So it's really to have maybe another angle on balancing that perspective of the active participants in a value chain, whether that be a banking value chain, and then vis-a-vis a service, a corporate responsibility to an entire community in terms of what now that company gets back. So that balancing on the demands that corporate social responsibility would have, but also the fair value distribution that really are demanded either by employees or by suppliers or actors within that. So really just to bring it into limelight when we are promoting, creating that shared value, from what perspective and what is the position of these ones who would benefit from the shared value. And I think it was I think maybe was it you, Mercy, where some of the examples were largely around health services, education services, and I wondered probably, was it yours maybe? No, maybe yours, I've forgotten. But whether, now just reflecting on most of the countries in Africa that are agriculture-based economies, how is philanthropy presenting itself in advancing agriculture development agenda? It looks like it becomes, I think from another panel that I attended earlier, it talks to either empathy, maybe health education. They become the key aspects that we see when we have the conversations around philanthropy. But when we look at alleviating poverty and economic development, especially on agro-based economies, how is philanthropy and the models of philanthropy, especially in influencing public policy, which is a catalyst to poverty alleviation in most of the country, how is philanthropy then presenting itself in this in the public policy space vis-a-vis agriculture development in general?
Is there any other hand? If not, I think let's take that question there, then we see if the panelists can respond while you develop more questions if you have.
Thank you, Program Director, Professor Moya. Prof. Moya, my question to the first speaker. He talked about businesses making profit and social corporate responsibility. Well, my question is that in your research, do you find businesses, or let me rephrase this question. So in my understanding, or in my layman's understanding, businesses are profit-driven. So the question is, in that case, where does the issue of philanthropy fits in? If they're profit-driven. Your paper looks good, but you need to organize it, so it should be clear. It must be clear. The issue of literature review, your research questions, problems, and the objective. They must be stated clearly. The question which is directed to you and the second speaker. Unfortunately, I've missed the first part of the second the third speaker. It's the issue of social corporate responsibility again. There is this issue where organization, if they want to start business or where they are engaged in business in the area, they fight with the community. The community will demand 1, 2, and 3, and say that this is our area. We want this and that. Then the organizations are compelled to toe the line. I mean, is that still a issue of giving, or they are forced by the laws or the demands from the communities? Which is which? And it's still coming to the first question, that are organizations willing to contribute or to give to the people, or they are forced by the status of the state? On the issue of policy, philanthropy and policy. So I want you to just to give us a picture on the issue between philanthropy and politics, the relationship between the two. On our discussion on our room there, so the issue of Ubuntu appeared strongly there. You will find that Chairperson Prof. Moyo, political organizations mobilize people, mobilize media. The political leaders of political parties are giving to the poor people. So then the question is that still part of Ubuntu that we are still talking about here? That's the question. It's philanthropy and politics. Then on local on local issues, I'm not sure, Prof, whether the localization is too broad. Maybe it needs to be broken down into specific issue. Like we are localizing. We are talking about economy, local politics, local. But if local is just broad, so it might be not legal as we want. So if, say, localization on 1, 2, and 3, I think and address specific issue rather than being locally. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. Let's just give the panelists to respond, not to everything, basically, because we have to stop at 1:45. And if I can ask you to take maybe 3 minutes each, basically, because that will give us at least up to 1:45. We'll start with you, Mercia, and you can pass the mic.
Thank you, everyone. So I'll start with the first question on effective local networks and how institutionalizing them, what it would mean for them. I think it's looking at local actors and something I think you are alluding to in a broad term, and looking at who's best placed to do what in the local space. And like I said earlier, it could be at the national space, at a village level, just depending on what you're looking at. But I think what, in my opinion, my experience, what is important is, one, it has to be very clear what the role of that network is and the impact it hopes to have. A lot of times when the purpose is clear, when the priorities are clear, then it's easy to know how to support. I think governance is important. The model of governance, the leadership structure, the legal structure has to be very important so that you can know who specifically are you acting or are you collaborating with. So if you have that for networks, because a lot of times networks are sometimes organized in a social way, but for you to act and work with them, they have to have, you have to know who you're working with legally. But also I see them providing a very important role from a localization point of view, and it's bringing different players to the same room and the same table. We have had the conversation on different people working in silos. Networks allow people to come together. It's an opportunity for knowledge sharing. You're doing what you're doing, but when you come together within the network, then you can share ideas, you can share lessons, and so forth. You can share models and things like that. So I think networks would play an important role, but I think their purpose has to be very clear. Second question is unpacking localization. Of course, that's true. It's a very broad term. You can look at localization from a government perspective, how they work at different levels. But from my experience, what I have had experience with is local actors from a non-profit point of view, whether it's CBOs, whether it's local, national non-profits, whether it's foundations, but local foundations. So looking at local actors from that point of view is what I was referring to. Yeah. I hope I have answered your questions.
All right. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you, Tendai, for your comments. So in the issue of agency, I battled, or still a battle, about where exactly do I place the agents of the participants into this program, which is the funder bringing in a program and co-opting the people. So do I place the agency at inception, which I don't think exists there, or do I place the agency of the participants as the program goes on? But where exactly to place it is still, I'm still struggling with that. On the issue of neoliberalism, yeah, I think maybe it's an area that I will then have to define from my perspective and how it affects my analysis of the outcomes and everything. And on Ubuntu as a concept, I don't know how I can situate that. Also because I can't marry the agents of the people in the projects. Besides the economic aspect of poverty alleviation and reducing the protests which hurt Monde as a company, right? And then the question on social corporate responsibilities, and I think it's a bit complex when you look at the whole Monde concept as it exists, right? Yes, there was community pressure, but also there is another player who, unlike in other communities where they can say, this is our land, we are forcing out the miners and this is our rights and everything. But when in that context, there is a very powerful player, the Ingonyama Trust, which is also in the mix and is working with Umondi. So which in a way reduces the voice or the impact of the local players or of the population. So I think it's the dynamics there are a bit different. And I think it's a give and take. You know, there is so much happening at the same time, and the outcomes are different. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. For me, I think the first, it was more of a comment on unpacking philanthropy. I think it is there in the paper. It's only that when you are presenting, you can't unpack everything, but it's something which would be taken note of. And then on the policy changes, contestations on attributions, I think it's also something which is covered in the paper on how do you attribute the philanthropy contribution to public policy. So it is also covered there, and the relationship between the government and the philanthropy. Then the second question, I think it was more on the opportunities on shrinking space. It's something which I was also looking at maybe as an independent study on what is the trend analysis, what is triggering the shrinking of space, civic space in Zimbabwe, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, and to some extent Rwanda. So it's more of that trend analysis. What is really triggering it? Or what can we do as philanthropy or as citizens? So it's a study which would be separate, which I am also looking at that. And then on agriculture, I think I just touched briefly on land, but in Zimbabwe, the only challenge that is there on land is it is contested, like because of the land reform issues and all that. But it's something which I had put in the main paper. But the issue of contestation, it also reduces the public policy influencing from the philanthropy or non-state actors because of the political stage. But yes, advancing that agriculture, since it's an agro-based economy, it's something which is really necessary, and there are many organizations that are working on that, and it can also be elaborated further. Then the fourth one, I think it was the relationship between philanthropy and politics. Yes, philanthropy and politics, they overlap because politics mostly they want power. They also want to control people. They also want to give public good, and philanthropy is more of giving public good. So on that overlapping issues that they have between the two, what are we saying around it? How do we bring the Ubuntu concept that you're talking about? I think it's something which would need to unpack, and I think it's also another area of study maybe which would look at the overlapping of politics and also philanthropy in serving the public good. So thank you very much for the comments.
Thank you very much. To Tendai, thanks for your comment. When you look at CSV, it's a fairly new concept, and for now, many researchers are focusing on how it manifests itself as a management practice. How do we gain that deeper understanding of its practice? Hence, one of the recommendations here is to look at it quantitatively, to look at the impact. But if you look at social impact, mostly when it comes to issues of social impact, even with philanthropy, it's difficult to measure social impact. In fact, we don't have readily available matrices to measure. They're still qualitatively when it comes to measuring social impact. So it becomes difficult. The only thing that we are managing to do as researchers now is to measure relationship. We can measure relationship by hypothesis if CSV has a positive relation on societal challenges, but measuring impact is a difficult thing. And to the lady there, what we see on the field or what we gather is there is buy-in from CEOs. But however, what becomes difficult is with this concept, maybe it's because it was written by Michael Porter, there was this euphoria, you find this word being bandied around within corporate. But if you start digging deeper, you find that. So the difficulty is there, but there are those, taken for an example, there is one CEO of a bank that is part of this study. Every time there is a program, there is a new product that is linked to societal change, he's the one who comes and present it. But the problem is it's difficult to know if someone is genuine, but CSV mostly has always been used as a sloganeering word. There is no CEO who will not take the opportunity of a podium to start speaking about how good they are doing for society, even if it's through philanthropy, even if it's through CSR. But when you start digging deep, you find that there is nothing, it's just a mirage. So maybe it's for researchers to go deeper, but as I've said, that we are focusing on this, because what we've realized is there are those executives who are prepared to do this, but they are finding it difficult. As researchers, we are trying to hypothesize that maybe the problem here is they still lack those guiding principles. They still lack those management practices that they could use to ensure that they make sure that this manifests in reality. So there are those who are prepared, but they are still struggling. So what is it that needs to be done is for us researchers to start interrogating that. Thank you.
cryptos, and philanthropy. And we're going to listen to them. We have 3 presenters who are already here. We have Patrick, Whiteleaf, and Daphne. So we're going to listen to them in that order. And each presenter will have 20 minutes. 20 minutes, exactly 20 minutes, because I will cut them off. I will interrupt, so get yourselves organized and keep to the 20 minutes. And after that, we're going to give the floor to the participants for observations, comments, and contributions. So we're going to start with Patrick, who will be talking to us about the emerging technologies and that are to an impact on the nature of philanthropy in Africa. So you have 20 minutes, Patrick, to present your work. Over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming through to listen to our presentations, the 3 of us. We hope you'll find some value in the presentations, and we hope we'll get some good questions and some good feedback. And so I'll get right into it. I hope the slides are changing. There we are. So before I start, I'd like to give a background on the presentation I'm going to make. Our presentation is a bit different from the other presentations, at least the ones I've sat in today. So the context of the presentation, and I think it'll provide some direction, is this is a paper that has resulted from ongoing work or previous research work that we have done. So that's the origin of the paper. And the previous research work covered 5 countries across Africa. And as we were doing this research work, we found a consistent theme. One of the things that was affecting a lot of NGOs, NPOs, CSOs is that a lot of them don't have sufficient systems to manage their philanthropic activities. So they're always struggling. They have data sitting somewhere, but they don't know what to do with it. They can't make data-driven decisions. So this happened on one project. We then did a second project, and the same thing came up. And so how the project was conducted, I know this question will come, so I want to answer it now before it comes. The first research project was mixed methods. So we had literature review, then we collected data using questionnaires. The questionnaires were online, and then we also did some face-to-face interviews, and we also did some focus groups. Then we also looked at the contextual nature of these 5 countries so that we can understand what is actually happening. So I'm just going to list the countries in no particular order: Senegal, South Africa, DRC, Cameroon, and Kenya. I think that makes 5. Yeah, and then we did our data analysis, and data analysis was very straightforward. Quantitative data, we use your normal statistical measures, and that was mostly done on Excel. And then we use a new tool that we're finding to be very fun to analyze the qualitative data. We use sentiment analysis. What do people actually feel about what's happening? So, and the beauty of it is that even if it's a paragraph that someone writes, we can say whether it's a positive feeling or a negative feeling or a neutral feeling. The paper that we're going to come up with after this narrows down to 3 countries intentionally, because that's where we could find some decent data, and that's Senegal, Kenya, and South Africa. DRC and Cameroon, the data is notoriously difficult to find, or good quality data. We then looked at this common trend of technology and systems and solutions and how it can be applied to NPOs or NGOs. I'll just call them NPOs to cover all of them, and how it can be applied to make their philanthropic work easier, how it can be applied to take the data that they already have inherently, data from the ground, data from research, data from surveys, and be used to make their decision, the quality of the decisions better. Interestingly enough, when we're looking at this topic of how will the emerging technologies driven by 4th Industrial Revolution have an impact, will it have an impact on philanthropy in Africa? We narrowed now down our literature review for this purpose. And we found that between 2013 and 2023, where we are now, there's 10 decent papers, and out of, no, there's 10 decent papers, and out of those, only 5 directly refer to blockchain. And out of those 5, none of them are in Africa. And they were all written in 2021, 2022, 2023, quite recently. 2 are in China, and I think 2 are in India. So where we are now, to prepare for this, we then said, we can't use the old literature review we did in 2021 and 2022 because it might not give us a good picture. So we went back and redid the literature review. So the paper that will come out of this conference is purely qualitative at this stage. Post that, we've made a recommendation to now try and get some quantitative data focusing on the 3 countries. So I've given the context, so then you'll see the direction where we're going. Contents, very brief, introduction, and we decided that in order for us to make sense, we can't start by talking about the impact that the 4th Industrial Revolution may have on philanthropy in Africa. We'll start by defining how we view the African philanthropic context based on the research that we've previously done and the things we've seen. Then we will talk about what 4th Industrial Revolution is in one slide, very short, and then the impact on philanthropy in Africa, and then we'll give some concluding remarks of what we think. And we're open to any additions, subtractions, questions, comments. Very brief. There's 3 authors, and I'm the one who's presenting on behalf of all of them. We've just given an overview who the authors are. Again, this is a big difference from the rest of the room. Only one academic. The rest of the 2 of us are just researchers, consultants, scholars, whatever you want to call us. But we've had the good fortune of doing quite a bit of research work in NPOs. We've also had the good fortune of developing training material for NPO sustainability. So we've been dabbling in this space for some time. So I'm not going to spend time, there's only 20 minutes, I'm not going to spend time going through everyone's background. It's there on the slides. Okay, so we started by saying, let's do our definition of philanthropy in Africa based on what we've seen. And we broke it down into just 3 sections, let's say 4 sections. And we called it Some Thoughts on the History of Philanthropy in South Africa. The first thing, and this trend has come up quite a bit, I think, Doctor, in the previous session we were in, Africa is socialistic in nature. You know, we give, we're welcoming, we've got that culture as part of the way we live, the way we've lived. So it's something that's in us inherently, in our villages. You know, there's a saying that in Africa, a child is raised by the village, not by a single parent or by a single family. Then we went and broke down what we've seen as a history in a very straightforward, simplistic way. We say there's traditional philanthropy, which has also come up quite a bit today, and we've seen this happening in a lot. This is externally driven. We don't want to pinpoint anyone to say it's Western driven, or it's externally driven from people outside Africa. And Africa has become a target for philanthropic activities for these people. It is more reactive than proactive. It reacts to challenges. There's very little proactivity going on. What is currently happening now, because we're talking about an inflection point, there's a move towards internally driven philanthropy. Africans doing philanthropy for Africans. That's how we're looking at it. What's the benefit of this? There's a social cultural understanding. So I originally come from Kenya. I understand the dynamics in Kenya. So I understand if I go and stand outside a shopping center and try and collect donations, I may not be that successful. But if I approach other cultural approaches and use other methods, I may be more successful. I have a better feel of the pulse of what's happening in the country, so I know where the need is. Therefore, we can be more proactive than reactive. What's the future? And this is what leads in to where we're going towards the end, is a need for robust systems. You'll realize that most of the systems that we have for philanthropic activities in Africa are either off the shelf or are given to us, and we're asked to use them or to learn how to use them. Initially, the future looks scary, and some people might look at it as a risk. Technology can provide cost-effective solutions, but at the beginning, it might look like it's very costly. And I think in one of the last slides, we've suggested that what can we do about that risk, perceived risk? we need to look at the lifetime cost of this technology. We need to look at the appropriateness of this technology for the African context. It can also drive collaboration. And in the slide where I talk about, a highlight of the fourth industrial revolution, that will become quite clear. And this is across geographical boundaries, and you can drive higher impact. You can reach more people much quicker and drive more impact. Okay. It's a bit slow, you'll bear with me, guys. Yeah, okay. So then the next thing we said, okay, what do we think is the African context? Now that we're at this inflection point, we're changing direction. What is currently happening in Africa? And we've put a use case there. And this came from Forbes in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. There's reference at the bottom for most of these. During COVID, mobile money transactions reached nearly $550 billion in sub-Saharan Africa. That tells you what you can do with simple mobile money. What if the technology was better? What kind of reach would you have? Post-pandemic, okay, so we start. Pre-pandemic, it's clear that people are already aware of mobile money and mobile money solutions. Post-pandemic, we've seen a trend where people are now saying, I don't want to use cash. I've been using this thing, so let me continue using it. I think it could be a good use case for philanthropy. We've had, and the people from Kenya will know about this one, a lot of NGOs sometimes struggle collecting money through M-Pesa because you can't do repeat collections. Yeah? So it's a once-off. Okay? The next thing we're seeing across Africa is the population growth. 2.5 billion population by 2050. How are you going to reach all of them if you do the traditional philanthropy approach? I want to go and see them. I want to go and visit. You need a way to get the information of what's happening and a way to go and engage with that information. Most of these people, 18 to 35, youth, adaptable to technology. So if the person is 35 now, and in the next 10 years they'll be 45, there are potential African philanthropists for their own continent. But they already know how to use all these fancy gadgets, and it's easier to get them that way. The other thing we found, and that's why there's this picture of climate action from the SDGs, when we're doing the research projects, we found that a lot of Africans, and I think it comes on the next slide, let me not say Africa, in Africa, climate action is not really a top of the list thing. It's healthcare, education, and I'll think of the next one, but on the next slide we'll look at it now. Now there's a strain on resources. 2.5 billion by 2050, the size of the land is not increasing. What are we going to do? So climate action starts becoming more important. Technology can tell us what's going to happen in terms of climate. We've got weather maps. We know a flood is coming. We know droughts are coming. Why are we still being reactive? Someone mentioned this in the previous session we were in. Then the other phenomenon we have in Africa is that use of conventional banking systems and banking channels is very limited. Someone said to me that in Dakar, in Senegal, you can only get ATMs in Dakar. Once you leave Dakar, what happens? Conventional banking systems and channels fall away. There's increased penetration of smartphones. A lot of Africans have 1 or 2, some 3 smartphones, so they're learning how to use it. Then we've got a very interesting trend. There's a rise of tech and innovators in Africa. Young guys who are building amazing technology that's appropriate for Africa, and they're being supported by people like the MasterCard Foundation, and the list is endless. So the skills are there. There's a good fintech sector. That is leading us to say, why don't we start adapting these localized technologies so that we can use them in philanthropy? So current state, what we call the current state of philanthropy in Africa, if it'll come up. Okay, we'll wait for it, good. What are the current philanthropy trends, what we see? So I mentioned focus on agriculture, focus on healthcare, focus on education. Across all the 5 countries where we did the research, the answer was the same. In some countries, there was religion also added to that mix. So other countries, apart from outside those 5, also have other priorities. In the Congo Basin, it's about protecting the forests. That's climate action. In other places around gender-based violence, it changes. Okay? So that's why we have zero hunger, good health, and quality education, because of the key things that are being looked at by most philanthropy actions. Evolution of philanthropy in Africa, there's increased diversity, Remember we said it was initially externally driven. Now we're getting there's a shift from emergency giving, because that was predominantly the trend. We're starting to also address socio-economic issues and aspects, and also environmental change. Then there's also a focus on social justice. I think in one of the sessions, it was your slide, humanitarian activities, and there's a trend to move. We're becoming more aware. A good example I like using here is in 2007 in Kenya, the post-election violence. There's an app that was built by some Kenyan guys called Ushahidi. Very simple app. If I'm here and there's social unrest, I ping it on a map, everyone knows, don't go there. Simple, right? People here don't have water, everyone knows, let's take water there. So these things can actually be done, and they've been done. Then there needs to be a drive to more sustainable giving, which is meeting SDGs, which has been spoken about over and over again. Diversity in philanthropic avenues. Let's not keep giving to the same things. There's other needs. I know there's South Africans here, and they'll understand this one. In rural South Africa, there are still children dying today in pit latrines. In such an advanced country, they still fall in pit latrines, and no one seems to be doing anything. Yeah, we'll fix it, we'll fix it. Gift of the givers tries, yeah, we'll fix it. But kids still die, right? We know it's happening, but we're not doing much about it. And we need to start having an African conversation, and this, I believe, is what's happening during this conference, because we understand the social-cultural dynamics. I did mention this earlier. So now we go to one slide that I think would have been nice to add. We've spoken about it a bit. Inclusive philanthropy. Africa has a lot of marginalized communities. We can then now see how we tap into technology solutions to bring these marginalized populations into the fold of philanthropy. Approximately 72% are at the age of 35 and under, that's in Africa, and 50% or more, I think it's slightly more than 50%, are currently women. And those tend to be the most marginalized communities. And I'm not going to go through the list of the areas where they're marginalized. It's gender, age, sexual orientation, physical ability, and all those things. Sometimes even language is a cause of marginalization, as per the example I gave about post-elections. 3 minutes. Great, I'll be done. What can be done? Empowerment and ownership. This has also been spoken about quite extensively today. And then adaptability and flexibility. We need strong monitoring, evaluation, research and learning tools. And this can be driven by technology. The stuff at the bottom, I'm not going to cover. We've spoken about it. Understanding of the context, engagement, commitment, and sustainability. Impact of 4IR. Okay, come, let's go. Okay. Sorry? It has refused, but I can quickly, let's try it again. Okay. Oh, well, no. I've gone one too far. There. Okay. Quick definition of 4IR. It's an integration of different technologies. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, blockchain applications, Internet of Things applications, and the big one, advanced big data analytics. Interesting predictions. This came from the World Economic Forum of what would happen by 2025. 80% of people will have a digital presence on the internet. So there's no way we can avoid technology. 90% of the population will be using smartphones. 90% of the population with regular access to the internet. 30% of corporate audits done using artificial intelligence. So you can report your philanthropic activities with artificial intelligence. Currently, or as of 2021, internet penetration in Africa on average was 62%, some countries better than others. This is my second to last slide, so we'll be done just now. Can you imagine technologies transform philanthropy in Africa? Our answer is yes. Following factors: we need to build digital resilience. This came also from Forbes magazine. Digital technologies are becoming important for all businesses globally. You can get good matching of philanthropists and projects, reach and impact. You can get lower costs because you don't have to travel that much, and you can get access to near real-time data. I think there's a presentation about that this morning. So that's increased access. Then you can track social challenges. Interventions and impacts can be tracked effectively, and you can identify and assess areas of need. We've spoken about that. Crowdfunding, I'm sure most of you already have experienced. And then the benefits of 4R may not reach all Africans now because of the digital divide, but eventually it will reach. Okay, concluding remarks. Okay, so how do we leverage 4R to support philanthropy in Africa? Use emerging technologies which are localized. We're then able to make data-driven decisions, critical. We've got all this data, but it can't drive our decisions. It can be based on societal structures. All our societies have got some sort of structure in them. There's increased transparency when you now do your reporting, which is critical. Then you need to have monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning frameworks, which are driven, that they drive impact, efficiency, scalability, which is your cost versus impact, and sustainability. Addressing the challenges so that we can get here. Average, I mentioned 62% internet access. We need to bridge the digital divide. We need to take cognizance of ethical considerations. POPI Act is becoming very popular. What data are we collecting about people and how are we using it? How are we storing it? How are we saving it? And appropriate technology needs to be relevant to Africa's social challenges. Thank you very much. The last slide is just a list of references. This is not the comprehensive list, this is a few of them. I think we've got almost 30 references to the topic, which will be in the final paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Let's move now very quickly to the second presentation. We are going to ask the questions, have the discussions at the end. We will hear first all the presentations and discuss later on. Wycliffe, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Wycliffe, like he has said. I'm affiliated to Egerton University from Kenya, and I'm also affiliated to Vet Business School in a way. That's where I did my PhD, which I just finished last year. So I'm going to present a paper on the impact of education, CSI, on access to education in informal settlements in Kenya. And I'm going to look at a case study of Wings to Fly. So if you asked what is the impact of CSI, corporate social investment in education, on access to education, obviously the answer will be it has a lot of benefits. It will give access to people who will not otherwise have access to education. So that we already know. But what we don't know is what is the effect on some specific groups, like on gender, for example, or the informal settlements, or even the people living with disability. So we have some kind of straitjacket CSI on education, and they're helping, but we don't know the effect on these particular groups. So that's why I want to look at this study, so that we're able to tell that either we need targeted CSI so that we can reach out to these specific groups, or already the sort of CSI that are existing are capturing these particular groups adequately. So I'll just go to I'll just show you some pictures. They are at the end, so I hope I'm going there. If the mixer can bring the slides on. I just want to show you some pictures about the informal settlements in Nairobi that I'm going to use to explain why they are disadvantaged, and therefore they will need some special or specific intervention so that we can have more children accessing education. I think it's not coming up, so maybe I can go straight to my slides. So knowledge is the currency of progress. You remember we were told that education is the key. Oh, there. Yeah, so you can see these are children that are learning in slums. In my write-up, I actually acknowledge the sources, so that is well done. So these are children learning in slums. These children will compete in very good schools. Look at the structure they have. But they are so much inspired to get the education. This is a school that was flooded after rain. The children had to leave school that day, probably for 2 or 3 days or even a week before they go back to school. So they lose learning hours, while the other schools in better schools are learning. This is a school in an informal settlement, no structure. Okay, so we were told that education is the key. But today I will say that it is the key to unlocking the untapped potential of individuals. In fact, the SDG 4 requires that the government should provide free and quality education to all boys and girls in primary school and secondary schools. So education will allow these children to get employment, for example, and high income. Well, if we consider all sources of income, you will say that maybe education is not the only source. But if you were to give everybody even $1 million here today to go and find a way of generating more income, then we always say that many people will go for holiday, some others, will invest in some kind of assets that will lose value after a short time. So that 1 million to each person here today, at the end of the day, will not really benefit as much. It will not lift a big population out of poverty, for example. But if you were to give education to everybody here, like I'm sure everybody is here because you are educated, then it is easier to lift you or people using education from poverty to a high income level. So yes, even though there are many other sources, but education still play a very big role in employment prospects and high income, reduction of poverty, and improving personal health and well-being. Some of the things like mental health can easily be solved when people have high level of education. So at the macro level, that is at the national level, education will help to enhance productivity in a country because it stimulates innovation. People come up with different ways of doing things and increases production, improved skills. It also reduces gender and income inequality. People who are more educated will have smaller gap in terms of gender and income. It increases opportunities for the poor and vulnerable youths, and of course, it enables the youth to participate in the democratic and political process. So we had a presentation here in the morning where the youths who are less educated are used or misused by politicians. And at the end of the day, they don't make a wise choice in the political or democratic process. But with education, you find that people participate and they participate wisely. So some of the challenges that we have in developing countries, Kenya included and many countries in Africa, is the youth bulge. So many speakers today have said that Africa is going to have the highest population of youth. And in Kenya, for example, over 28% of the population. Sorry. Okay. So in Kenya, over 28% of the population ranges between 12 and 24, and that is the level where they demand primary education and secondary education. And the budget is heavy because the government revenue is reducing. The donor income, the donor revenue or the donor funding is also reducing. So with this, the government is not able to support or provide adequate resources for children at this age to go to school. So challenges in informal sector, this group have their own challenges. For example, the allocation of resources is not equal. For example, in the informal settlements in Kenya that I'm looking at, you find that with a population of close to 2 million, there are only 8 public schools, and there are over 122 public primary schools. So already even the government does not allocate the resources available equally. Then there is lack of proper infrastructure, as we have seen where the children are learning from. There is inadequate supply of government schools, I've mentioned that. Then they have insecurity back at home. When they crisscross those shanties to go back at home, a lot of insecurity, especially to the ladies. Then they are also affected by the parents' socioeconomic status. So given that most of the parents living in these slums are very poor, these kids, when they go back home, for example, they have no time to do their assignments. They have to go maybe do help the mother to do business or take care of young brothers and sisters at home. There is no lighting that can be used to revise and all that kind of stuff. That also shows that there is poor living and studying environment and lack of social cohesion in their places. So with this in mind, we find a gap. Generally, the impact of CSI interventions in education is not yet well documented, and it is not clear whether the sort of the general CSI in education that exists improves access to the marginalized group. So I have 3 research questions. Specifically, we want to evaluate the impact of wings to fly, and I'm going to talk about wings to fly, what it means. So we want to evaluate the impact of wings to fly, how it helps in access to high school education by the youth from informal settlements, and how it increases employment and income of these youths, and the socio-economic benefits of the wings to fly to the families and other beneficiaries. So what is Wings to Fly? Wings to Fly is a program that was started by Equity Bank, and it gives scholarships to candidates who have sat for KCPE, that is Kenya Certificate of Primary Education. These boys and girls must have scored over 300 marks in order to be considered for Wings to Fly. So for the beneficiaries, they are normally given school fees, a bit of shopping for high school. Even back at home, the program covers their living expenses. The program also pays school fees for them in university and college. And it also offers some kind of career training and guidance and mentorship in addition to just paying school fees. So the program has been there for the last 13 years, and over 33,000 beneficiaries have gone through. Every year, the program gets about 100,000 applications, and they award between 2,000 to 3,000 scholarships. So the study country is Kenya, and of course, I'm focusing on informal settlements, 4 of them in Nairobi. The reason I have chosen Kenya is because Kenya has some of the largest informal settlements in the world. In fact, Kibera is the 4th largest informal settlement in the world, according to UN Habitat. So I'm going to focus on Kenya. And I've chosen slums in Nairobi for the first round of this study. So my sampling frame will be the applicants of Wings to Fly. I will basically divide these applicants into 2, those who have obtained the scholarship and those who did not get the scholarship. So I'll use quantitative econometric analysis, and those who obtained the scholarship will be considered as the treatment group, and those who did not obtain the scholarship will be the control group. So I will collect data through surveys by use of telephone and email. So the data would information on demographics, access to education, employment, and income. I'll first of all use t-tests to run analysis to see if there's a difference between the treated and untreated group. Then I'll use difference in difference to conduct more rigorous analysis to tell the effect, to quantify the effect of Wings to Fly on access to education in informal settlements. So I forgot to let you know that this paper is actually an ongoing work. I've just started it, and I will be happy to receive comments from you as I move forward with it. But as at this point, my next step will be now to conduct the survey and do analysis and write the report. And I expect that I'll be able to come with evidence-based results. I'll be able to produce some rich data set on CSI, and I will also be able to come up with some policy report, research notes, and a journal paper. So that's the end of my presentation. I welcome comments, questions, and suggestions, which we are going to take at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We are now going to call Daphne. We invite Daphne to come and make the 3rd presentation. You have 20 minutes.
Good afternoon.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Donc, mon étude, le titre c'est la motivation pour les étudiants dans 2 universités sud-africaines. Donc, ce que je vais vous présenter en fait, c'est les résultats de cette recherche, les progrès réalisés.
What I'm observing is that the results of my study shows that convenience and solicitation are the most motivations for alumni giving. But I will take you through how I got to those results. So my name is Daphne Nemakabane, and a student, a Masters of Management student in African Philanthropy at Wits Business School at the Center for African Philanthropy and Social Investment. So I'm just trying to bring the Okay, thank you. So, because I'm the last speaker, I will then borrow from, for this session, I'm not quite sure if there's any other presenters after me, but I'll borrow from the keynote speaker for this morning who spoke about the need for resource mobilization in institutions of higher learning, the need to mobilize resources because of different needs and also the need to diversify the source of funding for higher learning institutions, because higher learning institutions, not like previously where they only worried about teaching and learning and their research, they are also affected by the challenges that are affecting their students in terms of the resources that the students need. They are not only looking at tuition, they are looking at also catering for other needs for the students. Most of you would remember that in 2015, there was a big up prize in South Africa, which was called Fees Must Fall. And that was because of the need for students, for the university to assist those students. But again, like I said, students are also looking for support. Students are also looking at new innovations from the university. Students are also looking at universities supporting them holistically with other needs as well. So, this study looked at the challenges that are faced by South African universities that are under enormous pressure to mobilize resources from third stream income, because as the first speaker has indicated this morning, there has been in previous years reduced government funding. There is high dependency in government funding in form of grants, in form of tuition fees as well that are expected from the students, which most of the students are paid for by government or are supported by government. So I looked at the alumni as the most permanent constituents of the institutions of higher learning or any institution for that matter. And I looked at the alumni as an alternative source that can, the universities can look at partnering with them in mobilizing resources in order for university to sustain themselves. I'll also borrow from the report by Inyatelo, the ASIPE report, where they indicated that a good measure of performance of universities' advancement efforts, these are the offices that are entrusted with mobilizing resources for the university's alumni participation rates. And by that, they are only referring to contactable alumni who also give philanthropically to the university. But then having said that, there is not much said about alumni giving, particularly in the context of South Africa or Africa for that matter. There is a lot of literature on alumni funding, but the literature is based in the US, in Europe, and all that. So this study, I'm hoping that the findings will contribute to a literature in alumni gifting in the South African context. So I was looking to answer a few research questions. I wanted to identify the factors that motivates alumni to give to their alma mater. I also wanted to look at the influence of your factors such as demographics variables. I also wanted to look at social variables that influence or rather motivate the alumni to give. So this study was guided by social identity theory. So I spent a bit of time working on the, looking at the literature or reading up on the literature for African philanthropy, Ubuntu. So we looked at the social identity ethos of Ubuntu. We looked at social responsibility, we looked at sense of obligation, we looked at a social identity for the students and how that will also motivate alumni to give to their alma mater. So I think the challenge with the limited studies with on alumni giving in the context of South Africa is that in most instances the African way of giving is misunderstood. It's not chronicled, and you have authors like Tliote who actually argue that the lack of giving for alumni in the context of South Africa is due to a lack of giving culture. But then we have a lot of African scholars that are challenging that narrative. We have Cagney and Ross that in their study, they actually posit that the practice of giving to others and sharing, it's something that is deeply ingrained in us as African culture. African scholars like Moyo also posit that giving is the cornerstone of Africans' existence and progress. And then also quoted Muponde as well, who talks about the tradition of African philanthropy being founded on the principle of hospitality, the principle of mutual care and interdependence as well. And also look at, when you look at African way of giving, because we mustn't prescribe how African should give. When you look at African giving, in most instances, it's horizontal, where people are giving to their neighbors without not publicizing it to the whole world, people giving to their siblings and all that. And then I also focused much on Ubuntu, where authors like Anugo also state that Ubuntu and philanthropy has a lot in common, because as African, we very much subscribe to the philosophy of Ubuntu, that I am, that you are. And then I also looked at other literature on alumni giving, where most of the literature that I've gone through actually identify your age, income, and having received financial aid, and the alumni who identify as their alma mater as the highest motivating factors for alumni giving. And then I also looked at the utilization of technology as the form of convenience, and I just have to highlight that your age, income, and financial aid in most studies are the most cited motivating factors that that also motivate alumni giving. I think I'm going back. Okay, so my next slides, I'm looking at other factors that are mentioned by other authors. They also mention awareness of need as one of the motivators for alumni giving, that people are only able to give if they are aware of the needs for the institutions, and then also reciprocity as one of the factors where people will give. They made an example of a student who might have received scholarship or any form of funding giving because they have received, they receive something in return as well. And then also financial assistance similar to that, alumni who have received scholarships or any other form of financial aid are found to be giving, showing their gratitude by giving back to their alma mater. And then solicitation as well, that comes up in my study, that in which the idea is received, meaning that you have to do it in integrity, with integrity, having permission for people, but people do give if they are being asked. And then also form of identity that I've also spoken to, form of these social variables, the social identity ethos of Ubuntu, social responsibility, where the authors posit that the ethical principle of kindness and benevolence underpinning Ubuntu philosophy are also are fundamental to its essence of function to strengthen the notions of social responsibility. And then also sense of obligation, where people are motivated by a sense of obligation because they identify themselves as the member of a larger group. Okay, next slide. So then, going to my preliminary finding of my study, this study adopted quantitative research method. I received responses. I used the survey method, online survey as well. I received responses from over 441 respondents. From both respondents were between the age of 26 and 34, followed by the respondents who are between the age of 20 to 25 with their undergraduate degree as their highest level of qualification, followed by honors, then masters. I didn't have any respondents who I think I only have one respondent who was over the age of 65. So that also raises the questions if the university still keep track of their old alumni, or whether they have the right contact details for their alumni. So in my studies, as I have indicated, these are work in progress preliminary funding. I used a logistic regression modeling to come to these results. We found that solicitation, having able to ask your alumni to give back to their alma mater, does motivate them to give back. And then convenience as well, and in this instance, I have looked at convenience that is offered by technology. There could be other convenience, maybe for old people, if I had, they could still prefer writing a check and be mailed and all that, but I think certainly with the group that have responded to my survey, I think they are very technologically advanced, most of them, and they would, most of them own a smartphone or a computer. And then interestingly, when we look at the social identity, social responsibility, and demographic variables, the correlation of the relationship between the likelihood to give and your social identity, your social responsibility, and demographic variables. So I think I have not to prescribe to Africans or South Africans how they give. So in this instance, my study was looking at the dependent variable was the likelihood to gift, but monetarily. So we were looking responsibility. And when you look at the way African gives, the way Africans are responsible for their communities, for their families, looking at the demographic variables of my respondents, I think most of you would know that most of the students in these universities are first-generation scholars, meaning that they are the first in their families to go to university, meaning that when they graduate, they have other responsibilities as well. So the results from my study to say that the higher their social responsibility, their heightened sense of social responsibility, doesn't necessarily, it means that in terms of money, they are less likely to give, but alumni can give their time, alumni can give their talent, they can even advocate for the universities. And because I'm only left with 3 minutes, let me just go to the last slide. I keep on going back. So the implication of this study, or at least this preliminary funding, the study has implications on strategies, it has implications on processes and systems, it has implications on policies as well. So the strategies, the recommendation to the universities, the preliminary recommendation is that when universities develop or enhance their strategy, they need to look at strategies that account for various factors that will include simplicity, convenience, and then also look at your online fundraising strategies, utilization of your social media, and all those other at your fingertip, and all that. They need to look at their solicitation strategy that they can segment to a certain demographic. The keynote speaker in the morning mentioned that for you to collaborate with someone to mobilize resources, you need to know them, meaning that we have to spend time then looking at our alumni and segmenting our strategy as to their preferred methods. And then also looking at strategies that will cultivate a profound emotional connection with their alma mater, and then for the systems that will support those strategies as well in terms of your online giving and all that, and also the policies that speaks to these new strategies that they have developed. The overall policies for the universities as well could be the finance policies that looks at the acceptance of cryptocurrencies and all this innovative way of financing that each individual alumni prefer. So I think I'll pause here. This was my story on alumni giving, and thank you very much for attending the session.
Merci beaucoup. Vous venez de...
Thank you very much. You just kept to the 20 minutes that you were allocated. So we'll open the floor to participants. Participants are also going to express their views on what they have heard. And I myself am going to give the floor to those who would like to take it. So we still have 40 minutes left to discuss, to exchange views on the topics. So just raise your hand. I will give you the microphone, but please be brief and to the point. If it is a comment, go straight to the comment. If it is a question, go straight, ask your question directly, so that we can have a round of interventions and a round of responses from the presenters. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Pauline Onja, and I have one question on alumni giving and the second one on the CSI project. So on alumni giving, on the demographic variable and economic variable, were there significant data set that could inform whether a certain age gives more, or it's also dependent on the economic level of different alumni? And then on the question of wings to fly, is the assumption that most of the scholarships go to students in informal settlement as opposed to other demographic like rural areas? Is there a significant number of the scholarships going to that demographic? Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. Mine are just quick questions. One, not a question really, but just a follow-up from the presentation that was made by the first speaker. And mine is a question based on the categorization that you laid out, traditional, present, and future. And my question is, with globalization, with technology, with a huge diaspora community, with shared causes, is it possible to have an exclusive way or an exclusive culture of giving in Africa? And then my other question is for the alumni giving paper. Have you found anything around the motivation for legacy, especially for high net worth individuals, alma mater, who are giving back to their schools? The other one is around maybe how the experience of students in those universities affects how they give back to the schools, because we found this as a key either enabler or demotivator for giving in the Kenyan context. And then the last one is the role of peer networks outside the alumni networks. For example, most alumni communities are either connected in other ways, maybe are part of a WhatsApp group or part of a corporate network, and these other networks that they are part of also influence if they give to schools or not. So I just wanted to know if that's a variable.
Autre question?
Any further questions? Well, we'll take 3 questions. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My name is Ndabeze Tatenza. My question goes to the second speaker. You mentioned that Kenya has been identified as one of those countries who are leading in terms of informal settlements. Do you have an idea of what is the reason behind these informal settlements in Kenya? Maybe to link it to the topic of philanthropy. Do you think that through philanthropy activities, this kind of informal settlements can be addressed in a period of maybe 10 years or less? That is the question. When on speaker number 1, Patrick, you are trying to link, or your paper is more on a digital issues for the Industrial Revolution. I'm told that we are approaching the 5th Industrial Revolution. The question is, are we, in your view, are we not moving faster and leaving people on the ground behind? Because seemingly there's a group, this thing of technology has become is moving into an elitism, where a group of people tend to understand it, and the larger group of the population does not understand it. Thank you.
Okay, merci. Est-ce qu'il y a une dernière?
Thank you. One last question before we have one last question. Well, before giving you the floor, I would just like to say 1 or 2 words. First of all, in the first presentation, set the stage on taxation and on philanthropy in Africa, based on a case study covering 5 countries. It is true that these are still studies that have not gone very far, but we would like to suggest to the contributor that they carry out the study properly, that they complete the study, because it will help us understand the contribution of digitalization, not taxation, digitalization, in the management of grants in Africa, and particularly the development of the platform on participatory financing, which is a type of financing that we have known for very long and based on the informal financing that we know of in our different countries, which makes it possible to fund activities, entrepreneurial activities. Small size or medium size and enterprise activities. Secondly, the other presentation speaks to the contribution of investment in the social sense in education. It is very important in Africa. And in fact, coupled with that, we should have also talked about investment in health, because the teacher, the image of teachers teaching in flooded areas it is common in Central Africa, or in areas in areas that are flooded. So investing in that, in classrooms, etc., would be relevant. And in the secondary sector, I think that the alumni should also come back, the fact that they come back not only in higher education, but also in primary school. So former graduates come and even give donations even of books to children who cannot access books, who cannot access access book resources. So the Vice Chancellor said it this morning, be it in secondary school or in universities, alumni should support pupils and students and even the university, because the model that was introduced in the morning is a model whereby it is the state which funds most of the education, is different from the model that we have elsewhere, where it is sometimes non-profit organizations which finance education, and with an investment, form of investment, which is more important, social investment. Philanthropy is seen as social investment. Hence, the name of taxes, where you have to invest in the social area. In philanthropy enables us to invest in the social area. So those are the few elements that I wanted to put on the table so that you can go further in the thinking process and maybe answer some of the questions raised from the floor. So over to you. I'll give you the floor so that you do not have to move. So I'll start here, then we'll continue.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the comments. Very valid comments there, and I take note of them to incorporate in my studies, particularly. Now, the first question that came to me is whether by far I've been able to, or I can be able to tell the proportion of the scholarships given by Wings to fly to different groups or rural area and urban centers. So the way they run the program, they have committees in each region that sit down to select. But in their advertisements, they have never declared whether they have some kind of clusters for specific groups or for rural or for urban. They have never declared that. I want to believe it doesn't exist. So if it is there, in the process of collecting data, definitely, I'm going to deal with the Equity Bank Foundation, and they will be able to tell me if they have a way of selecting from each group. But again, this is the reason why I think there could be a bias. In Nairobi alone, people living in informal settlements are about 2.2 million, because UN Habitat says over 58% of the residents in Nairobi live in informal settlements. And Nairobi has a population of more than 4 million. So you expect more than 2.2 million to be living in informal settlements. And if they are not getting equal proportion of the scholarships awarded each year, then it means there is some kind of bias. And that is exactly what we are interested in. The second question, why there is a high proportion or larger informal settlements in Nairobi, and whether philanthropy can solve the problem. Really, at this point, I'm not able to tell the reason. I think this is an economic problem that needs to be investigated. But I think it's partly because of the rural to urban migration, unemployment. You find that most youths that are unskilled always believe that in the city they will be able to get employment. You know, a lot of construction going on in the city. And they come in the city as youths, but these people live in the city until they have their families, and the only place they can afford accommodation is, or to live, will be the informal settlements. So I believe there are some studies who have done something close to why this is happening in Kenya particularly, but this is something yet I've not yet come across, and I will be looking out for it. Whether philanthropy can cure, what I didn't get is whether it can cure or reduce the size of informal settlements in Kenya. If that is the question, I don't think that can bring a solution, because it's an ongoing problem. Some of these problems you solve, and it grows again. So maybe if the economy grows, and maybe if the reason why the informal settlements come up can be solved, then we can reduce the number. But philanthropy alone, I doubt if that will be able to cure the problem. Maybe government must be involved and other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions and inputs. As I have indicated, that this is still work in progress. Some of these comments will help me going forward in writing my research report. So the first question on demographics variable and socioeconomic variables, there isn't really any statistically significant relationship between your demographics and economic variables. But when you look at some categories, like for income, a group of people who are earning less than 5,000 rand, for example, they are less likely to give, which I think is self-explanatory, because they don't have much to give. And we also have female alumni who identify with their alma mater, also subscribe to Ubuntu, who also comes up as with a negative relationship between them and the influence on giving. And then intriguingly, what comes out of the results is that the alumni who selected short learning programs as their highest level of qualification, there is a significant positive relationship between those and the likelihood to give as well. So motivation for legacy, I haven't really gone that far. I haven't checked that. I don't even know if we checked that, but most of our alumni I know from at least the institution, one of the institutions that I have surveyed the alumni from, that most of them are first generation scholars. So when I think of this negative relationship on the influence, thinking it could be a conflict of priorities, because as you know, they have this heightened sense of social responsibility, but they could be giving, maybe future research could look at if they are giving to something else. Maybe they are not giving to their alma mater, but they are giving their time somewhere, or future research can even look at what other model of giving, because it's not only money that we give as well. And then also on other networks, I haven't checked that, but I think it's something that can be explored, particularly when you look at solicitation, because one of the studies mentioned that alumni actually, they don't like it if the only communication or the only way that they hear from universities is because they are asking them for funding and all that. So these are things that perhaps when we expand on the study, we can look at for the second question. And the comments are also noted from the facilitator, and it's some of the realities that we experience as well, that even in the South African context, there's high dependency on government funding in at least some of one of the institutions that I have surveyed. And then again, agreeing with the comment that there are other ways of giving, not only to the universities, alumni from other categories as well, how they can give back to their alma mater, and not only looking or making finance the center of their giving. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions and the one comment. So I'll start with the first question about the history, past, current, and future, and if it's possible to have an exclusive giving culture in Africa. I don't think it would be fair to say that, because that means everything we know about giving up to now falls away, and we build an exclusive culture, which might take another 10, 20, 15 years, and it might be futile, and it might be repetitive in nature. There was a comment about diaspora, and interestingly enough, in the two previous research projects that brought this up, we're also looking at the diaspora. And so diaspora from South Africa living in another country. And we categorize diaspora in two ways. So we said we've got, I'll loosely call it internal diaspora. You've got a Kenyan living in South Africa. So that was one group. So Africans who are not living in their country of birth. Then there's the other African citizens who are living outside Africa. So we did look at that, and we got some good data on that. But as I said, it was only focused on the 5 countries, but it gave us some good indications. Then the second one on the digital aspect, and that we're fast approaching the 5th Industrial Revolution, and some people are being left behind, and it might lead to exclusivity. This is something that has happened typically with every industrial revolution. And the challenge with this one that we're in, or getting out of, is that it's moving so quickly that a lot of people are struggling to keep up. Hence, in the last slide, I spoke about one of the things that has to be done in order to use technology effectively in the philanthropy space is bridging that digital divide. So there has to be a conscious, it's there, we did notice that it'll be a problem if it's not resolved. And I think as we do the research further, especially when we move to the quantitative stage, because now we've just done the literature review, the qualitative bit. When we do the quantitative bit, when we talk to people on the ground, we may be able to get some indication of how this can be bridged. So that's yet to come. Then the last one was a comment from the chair that we need to complete the study properly, particularly systems and solutions for participatory financing. Hence, we're saying we've finished the literature review up to that point, and we've got initial recommendations, initial findings. And one of our key recommendations is, post this, there has to be a qualitative portion, because just the quantitative one is not going to do, given that there's very little literature in existence. So we've taken that into account. Thank you very much.
Merci. On va encore.
Thank you. We still have some time. Let's take another series of questions. Yes. Come over. We are going to give the floor to the participants for them to react, and then the presenters will answer.
my brother Wycliffe. I think, in as much this is not what you're looking for or looking at, the drivers of all the mess that we call urbanization in Kenya. I think a short answer is really the chaos of the urban city. I mean, sorry, the city in Africa or the urban space in Africa. You'll have to do a socio-historical analysis to see it is a history of exclusion, initially on the basis of color, and then later in post-independent Africa, it's continuously, like you said, this rural-urban migration. The slum becomes the first place of call for most people when they move in, as young men and women trying to do something. So that you need to bring out that up. And therefore, that will be able to probably give you a sense of exactly what's happening. We are not looking at some of the things that Catherine was asking, because I don't think we actually collected data on that. So even if we went looking for it from the data that we have, I don't think we have the answer. However, there might be certain explanations which is speculative, because we haven't done those tests yet, to do with whether these other demographic issues, factors, are significant. One is our sampling, remember, was convenience, only those that chose to. And therefore, there might be a sampling bias. Probably if we had a far much larger sample, some of either the negativity or the neutrality might be evened out. But it's quite speculative, so it's the areas that we need to recommend further research to look at that. And something about my brother here, Patrick, is it? Yes. I think you said Cameroon was a problem with the data. Was it Cameroon? Yeah. Talk to him. He's a professor in University of Yaoundé and an economics professor, one of the best probably when it comes to gathering data, depending on, of course, how you're gathering data. And I think the purposes for these conferences is to have these networks and links so that we can be able to use them or capitalize on them in future things. Because I think it will be a waste, in my view, if we do not follow it up with trying to get as much data. And I'm sure it will be able to find a way of assisting some of these things. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you, Facilitator. I would like to thank the presenters for their brilliant presentations. Mine is that I wanted to ask you a question related to research financing in Africa. Can philanthropy be a financing source for research in our universities? This is my question. That's an important question that he asked. Can philanthropy, and this question is not for those who have made presentation, even those who are in the room, if you can answer this question, can philanthropy be considered as a financing mechanism for research, and I would even say academics in Africa? Can it fund our universities? Can it fund our primary and secondary schools? And I'm going to reverse the question, and I will be going from digitalization and
in my opinion, I think it would be a very slippery slope. Usually, money that comes from a philanthropic source is targeted for a particular reason. I'm not saying it cannot be tried or tested, but the outcome of that research needs to give a solution to something, not just because I want to do research, I'm going to get money from a philanthropic source. If my memory serves me right, I know there are some philanthropic organizations that fund research to some extent, but it's research towards a solution for something that has been picked up as a challenge. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think to a certain extent, yes, it can. I don't know if I captured you correctly, but depending on what is it in for them, if your mission or whatever that you are researching is aligned to their vision or their motivations as well. So I think to a certain extent, there are philanthropists who are funding research. There are philanthropists who are funding education as well. Thank you.
Okay, I agree with the last speaker that philanthropy can be a source of funding for research. Philanthropy is actually an intervention to a problem. And the best way always to intervene is to have evidence of what you expect. If you do A, what do you get from B? So to me, I would encourage philanthropists to always seek evidence, and this can be through research. Then I will also comment on what Jacob said. Yes, this is a very important observation. I will conduct socio-historical analysis. In fact, in a brief literature review that I did, the main problem that I encountered was color. And the people of color really have a big problem accessing education. And also the people who live in the US, a number of studies have been done on people who live in the inner cities, and they have a challenge accessing education. So I have done a bit of it, and I will increase that bit of the study. Thank you very much for that observation.
Oui, réponse dans la salle aussi.
Yes, someone wants to answer in the room. Let's give the floor to Vicky, and then we come back to you. First to Vicky.
I know that. Excuse me. We can test it. Okay. Thank you so much. I think the question around can philanthropy fund research and higher education, I want to contextualize this historically. The history of higher education in Africa is potentially 90 to 95% funded, or was historically funded, by philanthropies. From different elements, you look at the medical sector, look at all the diseases that were researched and addressed. The Rockefellers were in the continent as far back as the early 1920s. Whether it's in West Africa, in East Africa, everywhere. You look at the infrastructure behind the health sector. The majority of it was constructed with the assistance of philanthropies. COVID-19, the first research that was done around vaccines was funded by Dolly Parton. The first $100 million that was given towards research. We might even move away from, so I went to the archives at the Rockefeller Archives Center in New York at some point and discovered the first building of what is now the General Hospital in Johannesburg. The first building, it was just one small building. And over time, it has been expanded, of course, with government support. But if you go and look at the amounts of money that came from philanthropies, the majority of it is actually from philanthropy. Our own governments in the 50s and 60s, they depended on philanthropy. Philanthropy actually even seconded personnel to actually go and occupy positions in the ministries of planning in terms of developing planning for most of our governments. our academics in the 50s, the majority of them were actually funded by philanthropists to go and study overseas so that they can come back with a particular version of higher education. So the idea that philanthropy cannot be considered for research today is something that I think we need to historicize, because almost everything that if you look at universities, especially those that are not highly subsidized, they depend on philanthropic monies. Even those that are subsidized now, because of the challenges that they are facing due to the economic downturn, the vice chancellors these days are spending almost more than 60 to 70% of their time fundraising for research, for infrastructure, for student fees, etc., etc. So philanthropy is actually financing the bigger part of our higher education, our basic education, including research and innovation. I just wanted to localize that and historicize it. So Jacob, did I speak on your behalf? Okay.
Yeah, if we look at education, even at more basic levels, a lot of the school infrastructure across the African continent is religious, from religious sources and whatever. Faith-based institutions that get into education, into health, and all these other things. And these are the things that we are considering. To date, some of them still retain certain identities, even though they get public teachers or funding. There's still quite heavy investments from these institutions. So it's, I think to say they can't is to miss the, is it the point or the bus? Yeah. It had already been said. That's why you want to speak.
Ok, merci. Non, non, donnez. Et passez ici, passez ici. Oui, je voulais juste
I just wanted to supplement to say that the model that was presented by the Vice Chancellor this morning was a model that operated in Africa. But if we take the case of Cameroon, we have two operating models, that of financing by the state and that of financing by the philanthropists. So we have universities in Cameroon that were built by philanthropists. Those were foundations right at the beginning. It was not universities built by the government. So in the creation, that was funded by the foundation that financed the teaching and the programs, the research. And in such a case, we cannot give a scholarship, because the philanthropists say that we give you this money to buy the school stationaries for children who don't have access, who don't have the means. And for example, we received all the documents on a platform that gives you access to the documents. The American who is learning or who's studying a banking book, you would have the same book in your country available online, because the philanthropist went and funded that book for you. The same program, the same book, same teaching. So you don't have to go to those countries to have access to those materials. So what Jacob has said is true. I think we have to move toward this model. And you can also note that all African universities that were created by the government, the state, are doing their best to put in place the foundations in their universities. We have this model in Cameroon. Rectors that understand are creating foundations. We have, for example, Cheikh Anta Diop University Foundation, Gaston Berger Foundation, and some American universities also doing the same. And next to that, we have also the Alumni Association. We create and ask those alumni what can they bring as a contribution for the construction of this university that has trained them, from which they have graduated. And we have, for example, heads of states that have been trained in our universities. So what is their contribution in return? This is the question, and thank you. Do you have something to clarify further, or is it okay? Thank you. Thank you. Round of applause for all of them and for all the participants as well. Thank you.